Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here in beautiful San Diego. I'm Rob Bonta, California Attorney General. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for coming out, and always appreciate the opportunity to be here. Also happy to welcome to California Professor Christopher Peterson from the University of Utah's S.J. Quinney College of Law. And first and foremost, I want to thank everyone who's been involved in making this legislation possible that we're about to announce. It's been truly a team effort. The author of the Assembly Bill 1366, my recently former colleague in the legislature, my colleague still today, Assemblymember Maienschein, and my team at the Department of Justice, including Eleanor Bloom and everyone who works in the Consumer Protection section that's been working on this, as well as Amy Alley and her team in our Office of Legislative Affairs. And I just want to say I've really had the pleasure to know my partner in this legislation for many years now, Assemblymember Maienschein. We joined the legislature together back in 2012, entered at the same time, ready to serve and with a lot of energy. We worked in on a number of important issues together. We were co-chairs of the California Rare Disease Caucus together. We co-chaired the Assembly Health Committee together, and we worked on a really important consumer protection bill that prevented everyday consumers, everyday people from receiving surprise medical bills, something that was not an easy lift, but a lift that we were able to carry together. So really proud of our work together, proud of Assemblymember Maienschein. He's a no-nonsense, common sense leader who is about delivering outcomes to the people that he serves. And I'm not the smartest leader in the world, but I am smart enough to know one important thing about Brian, that we do a charity a softball event every year, and I was wise enough to notice that his team always won. When I was against his team, my team lost, and when I was on his team won. So I always tried to be on his team. He's a man of multi-talents, but most importantly, a great leader for San Diego. And this bill, his leadership on AB 1366, is no exception. California has some of the strongest consumer protection laws in the nation. But sometimes, even when we're successful in holding companies accountable for breaking the law, the consumers are left empty-handed. Those who have lost money, had it fraudulently or unlawfully taken from them, are left empty-handed. Because if a business collapses, if it is insolvent, if it goes bankrupt, if it is not liquid, after it's all said and done, there's no backup resources. There's no money to compensate the victims for their loss. At the end of the day, consumers aren't left thinking in these situations that justice was served. They're left asking, what about me? How am I made whole? And this bill, AB 1366, answers that question. By establishing the Victims of Consumer Fraud Restitution Fund, this legislation would create a backstop. It would create a source of funding to make those consumers whole. It would give us a new tool in our consumer protection toolkit. With the new restitution fund, we'd be able to recover ill-gotten gains from corporations who break the law and help make whole people who've been used, abused, left in the dust of a crumbling company. As the people's attorney, it's frustrating, very frustrating, to walk out of a successful court case knowing the consumers we fought for won't see a dime in return. We've seen that too often. With a restitution fund, the victims of Paul Blanco's so-called good car company could have been able to recoup their losses in the $20 million judgment we obtained last November, but none of that $20 million have been paid to any consumers because of the illiquidity of the Paul Blanco good car company and the lack of resources. There's also the 4,000 California service members, those who are serving their country, who were defrauded and discriminated against by USA discounters. They could have recovered money and beyond the $7 million that we were able to secure in debt relief for them. While in many ways California is a nationwide leader in consumer protection, this is one area where we've fallen behind. In California, we like to be first, best. We like to be on the front foot in a leadership role. And here there are others who have already moved into this space and got it done. It's time to catch up to our counterparts in New York, in Arizona. It's time to catch up to the federal government, who has created the Civil Money Penalties Fund. It's time to extend Californians that common sense reassurance that companies don't get to keep ill-gotten gains, and when they are hurt, they will be made whole. And we are committing to the fact that if we succeed in holding a company accountable for its unlawful activity, we can get money back to the people who were harmed along the way, even when the company goes belly up. Because true justice cannot be served when victims are left behind. And with AB 1366, we're ensuring that we are serving true justice. So this is a strong consumer protection bill. It's for the people, about making them whole, making sure that they're protected from predatory corporations. And I want to say thank you again to the great team working on this, and especially thank you to Assemblymember Maienschein, who has once again knocked it out of the park. And without further ado, I'll give you Assemblymember Mainshine.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Well, thank you, Mr. Attorney General. We're always so fortunate to have the Attorney General come down to San Diego, and as somebody who's worked with him throughout my career, as he said, we worked together on the Rare Disease Caucus, co-chaired that, as well as the Health Committee. But we're fortunate to have a partner now who cares so much about San Diego, who doesn't hesitate to come down here. It's easy to get stuck up there in Sacramento when you're the Attorney General, but to have somebody who cares this much about our city, I'm very grateful to you for that. And since he did mention the legislative softball game, I'm going to talk about that for about the next 20, 30 minutes. No, I won't do that. But I will tell you, I was smart enough to always pick him first. He was always my first pick on the team. So besides being a great Attorney General, he's a great softball player, too. California's robust consumer protection laws are some of the strongest in the nation and have inspired other states across the country to follow our lead. Despite this, predatory businesses still find ways to take advantage of consumers and make profits off their illegal conduct. Attorney General Bonta has been very successful in pursuing legal action against these businesses and seeking restitution for their victims. But unfortunately, corrupt businesses found in violation of these laws sometimes go bankrupt, leaving victims without any financial compensation for their losses. This year, I've partnered with Attorney General Bonta to ensure that victims can and will receive the restitution they deserve and to keep businesses from profiting off their wrongdoing. AB 1366 would open a pathway for justice for those victims by authorizing the Attorney General to seek the ill-gotten gains of businesses found to be in violation of California's unfair competition and false advertising laws. These gains would then be placed into the Victims of Consumer Fraud Restitution Fund, which is also created by this bill. The fund would serve to make victims whole when predatory companies become insolvent. Proceeds gained from illegal conduct should go towards compensating victims and not be allowed to remain in the bank account of bad actors. I'm certain that AB 1366 will not only protect consumers from being taken advantage of, but will also deter businesses from wrongdoing, knowing that they will not be able to hold on to the profits they make while in violation of these laws. Now I'm happy to introduce Professor Christopher Peterson from the University of Utah's S.J. Quinney College of Law, who will discuss how legislation like this can have an impact on the federal level. Professor?
Well, thanks very much, General Bonta and Assemblymember Maienschein. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm a law professor at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. I want to say thank you as well to all the staff for your two respective offices and for your leadership in trying to craft better legislation to do right by consumers here in California and also provide an example of leadership across the country. One of the hardest things that policymakers do, and also just mere teachers like me as I try to teach my students about the law, one of the hardest things that we do in this kind of a space is draw the line between what kind of conduct is acceptable and what kind of conduct is not acceptable. On the one hand, we want to have an open economy that lets people do the things that they want to do, build things, provide services in an efficient way. That there's a lot of advantages to that, and California does a great job at it, as do many other places around the country. But at the other hand, we also cannot accept companies that take advantage of our consumers through deception, through tricks, through traps. This press conference today is not about that problem. Instead, this is about when we have cases where the Attorney General's office has already won. Whatever's illegal, that case, that's already been decided by a judge where there's evidence of wrongdoing. And now the Attorney General's office is trying to take steps to provide compensation to the victims of that wrongful conduct. But that gives rise to a couple of problems that I see happening in California. And in my research, my studies of this problem across the country, sometimes, example one, you might have a situation where you win the case as a law enforcement agency, either at the federal or the state level, but you cannot identify the victims of that harm. You know that it happened. You know that there are people out there who have been taken advantage of, but you can't track down their bank account information or their address or their location to give them the compensation that they deserve, having been wrongfully hurt by the company that engaged in illegal conduct. The second example, suppose that you win a case, but the scammer, the company that engaged in predatory activity, has somehow absconded with the funds. Maybe they put it in some offshore shell company, or they spent the money and it's gone, and you actually you've won the case, but you can't get any funds from them to provide remediation back to the people who were harmed. So the clever thing that this bill does is it takes those two problems and it uses them to solve each other. Why? Because suppose you have somebody, you have funds, but you can't identify who's entitled to get those funds, or in another case, you don't have funds, but you do have people who need some compensation. This bill creates a victim compensation fund where those funds can be set aside and reserved in situations where the case has produced funds, but you don't have a victim to give them to. You can take those funds and provide compensation to somebody else that's deserving, that's been a victim of illegal activity. You know, it's not unprecedented. There are a couple of other states that have done this. And at the federal level, the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where I worked back during the Obama administration, has a similar, to some differences, but a similar type of fund. So this is not unprecedented. But it's great leadership, and it should be non-controversial. Everybody in California should be able to get behind this bill to provide compensation to the public who have been harmed by illegal activity. So for my part, for whatever it's worth, a law professor, a teacher from Salt Lake City, Utah, I think that you're doing a really great job. And I also want to say, before I stop, I want to thank my colleague from the University of Minnesota, Prentice Cox, who together we worked on a scholarly article published in the Yale Journal on Regulation, published it a couple of years ago. And I think that our work shares some of the DNA that you see in the legislation that you're sponsoring. And I really think that you have a lot to be proud of. So I'm hoping, for whatever it's worth, that you will share with your readers, folks at home, that this is a positive step forward to try to make a better California and provide leadership for other states across the country. So thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back to the guys that are important, that you really want to talk to, if anybody has any questions. Thank you so much for having me.